The cathedral is full. Candles line every pew. The congregation of Caldervane's finest nobility sits in hushed anticipation. Flowers, white roses and winter jasmine, are draped from every column. Amelia stands at the entrance to the nave. She wears her mother's wedding gown, altered twice to fit her smaller frame. Her veil is ivory. Her hands are steady. Her mind is not. She has rehearsed this moment for 6 months. She knows what she is doing. She knows why she is doing it. She knows the Duke of Marvith is a practical choice, a sound alliance, a man of 53 who will not bother her overmuch and will restore the Voss name to respectability. Countess Vera straightens Amelia's veil one last time and squeezes her hand. They share a look that says everything sisters say without speaking. The organ begins. Amelia walks. She does not look at the man waiting at the altar. Not yet. She keeps her eyes on the bishop, on the candles, on the floor. She reaches the altar. She looks up. The man standing beside the bishop is not the Duke of Marvith. He is taller, younger, dark-haired. He watches her with an expression of quiet attention that she cannot read at all. His eyes are brown and very still. Amelia looks at the bishop. The bishop smiles. She looks at the stranger. He inclines his head very slightly, as if greeting her at a dinner party rather than an altar. She is still looking for the Duke of Marvith when the bishop begins to speak. She is still not finding him when the congregation settles into listening posture. She is calculating escape routes and the social cost of fainting when the bishop reaches the vows. The bishop asks her to repeat after him. She does. The words come out in the right order. She is proud of herself for that. Then the bishop reaches the name. He says, "Do you, Amelia of House Voss, take this man?" and pauses for her to fill in the name. Amelia opens her mouth. She says, "Adrian." She does not know why she says it. It is not the name she prepared. She has no idea where it comes from. It simply arrives in her mouth fully formed, like something she has always known, and she says it quietly at an altar in front of 300 people. Silence. The man beside her turns to look at her. He is smiling. It is a small smile. It is real. He says, "That happens to be my name." And then, because the bishop is waiting and the congregation is frozen in collective confusion and Amelia's face has gone the precise color of the white roses. "Shall we continue?" Amelia stares at him. She says nothing. She gives the smallest, most mortified nod in the history of the kingdom. They continue. The ceremony concludes. The bishop pronounces them wed. Amelia is fairly certain she has just married the wrong duke. She walks back down the nave beside Duke Adrian, because that is, apparently, his name, with her hand on his arm and her thoughts going in 17 directions at once. He is warm under her hand. His arm is steady. He matches her pace exactly, which no one has ever done before because she walks fast when she is anxious and she is always anxious. They reach the cathedral doors. The congregation applauds. The sunlight outside is aggressively cheerful. Amelia smiles for the crowd. It is a good smile. She has practiced it. Adrian smiles too, and his looks are easier than hers, and she finds this quietly infuriating. They stand at the top of the cathedral steps while people mill around them and toss flower petals and say things about happiness that no one actually means. Lord Fenwick materializes at Adrian's shoulder, looking deeply entertained. Fenwick's expression says, "I am never going to let you forget this." Adrian's expression says, "I am aware." Amelia is not looking at either of them. She is looking for Vera. Countess Vera appears at Amelia's other side, takes her arm, and steers her 3 steps away under the guise of adjusting her veil. Vera looks at Amelia. Amelia looks at Vera. Between them passes every sister conversation that has ever existed, compressed into approximately 2 seconds. Vera looks at Adrian across the steps. Her expression shifts. She looks at Amelia. She shrugs in a way that says, "Well, he is considerably better looking than Marvith." Amelia closes her eyes for 3 seconds, opens them, and returns to her husband's side. The reception is held at the Caldervane Grand Hall, as planned. Someone has rearranged the seating cards. Amelia notices this and also notices that the placards now read Duke Adrian and Duchess Amelia, which means someone knew about this before today. She sits beside her husband at the high table and drinks her first glass of wine rather quickly. Adrian does not comment on this. She appreciates it. She studies him while pretending to look at the room. He is, and she resents this slightly, exactly the sort of man who is easy to look at. Not showy about it. Just present in the way that makes other people in the room seem slightly out of focus. He is talking to an elderly lord on his other side. He listens more than he speaks. When he does speak, the lord laughs. Amelia turns back to her food. Lady Hargrove appears at the corner of the table and leans in with the expression of someone who has been waiting all day for this moment. Lady Hargrove informs Amelia, in a voice calibrated to carry to exactly the right number of ears, that she has heard the most extraordinary thing about the vows. She asks if it is true. Amelia says it is a matter of pronunciation. Lady Hargrove says that she did not know Marvith and Adrian were pronounced the same. Amelia says she is working on a theory. Adrian, without turning from his conversation, reaches over and refills Amelia's wine glass. Lady Hargrove watches this. Her expression recalculates the entire situation. She excuses herself. Amelia finds a temporary escape behind an arrangement of particularly large flower urns. She stands there breathing for a moment. Just breathing. She does not know what happened today. She does not know where the Duke of Marvith is. She does not know why she said Adrian at the altar. She does not know what she has married. She knows this. She said his name. Somehow. Before she knew it. And he smiled. She is thinking about that smile when footsteps approach her flower-urn sanctuary. It is, of course, Adrian. He stands beside her, looking at the room beyond the flowers, making no move to bring her back into it. He looks comfortable standing behind a flower urn. This is either a good sign or a deeply suspicious one. They stand in silence for a moment. Then he says, "The Duke of Marvith sent a letter 3 days ago. The arrangement was dissolved. Their fathers, it is a long story. It ends with an agreement between his house and hers. He says he is sorry she was not told. He says that was wrong." Amelia looks at him. He means it. She can tell. She has become very good at reading men who mean things and men who merely say them, and this one means it. She asks why she was not told. He says he does not entirely know. He suspects it was her father's attempt to keep her from refusing. She says that is exactly what she would have done. He says, "I know." She looks at him for a long moment. She asks what they are supposed to do now. He says, "I suppose we are married." He pauses. "I would like to try to do that well, if you're willing." The reception noise fills the space between them. Amelia says she will think about it. He says, "Fair enough." And then, because the flower urns are only so good a refuge, they return to the party. They travel in separate carriages, by unspoken mutual agreement. This is probably for the best. Amelia's carriage contains Vera, Amelia's luggage, and a quantity of unasked questions. Vera says nothing for the first 10 minutes. Then she says, "He seems decent." Amelia says she needs more than 10 minutes to determine dissent. Vera says, "You said his name." Amelia says she is working on a theory about that too. Vera says nothing more. She is smiling slightly, in the way older sisters do when they believe they already know the ending. Ashvale is larger than Amelia expected. Older. It has the feel of a house that has been lived in rather than displayed. Worn stone. Ivy on the east wing. Candlelight in windows rather than the harsh glare of gas lamps. She stands in the courtyard and looks at it. Adrian stands beside her, watching her look at it. He says, "It takes some getting used to." She says, "It is very large." He says, "There are parts of it I have not been in for years." She thinks, good. That means there are places to go where he is not. She files this away as useful information. Her rooms are in the east wing. They have been prepared with obvious care. Fresh flowers, extra candles, new linens. Someone has placed a small stack of books on the writing desk. She looks at the books. She does not know how to feel about the books. She sits on the edge of the bed in the dark for a while. This is her life now. This large old house. This man she does not know. This name she said by accident at an altar. She picks up one of the books. It is a history of the Caldervane border territories, precisely the sort of thing she actually reads, which means someone asked about her preferences, which means he asked about her preferences. She puts the book down. She picks it up again. She reads until the candle burns low. Breakfast. Just the two of them, because Vera has returned to the city and Fenwick apparently eats in his own rooms until noon. Emilia arrives to find Adrian already at the table with a newspaper and coffee. He folds the newspaper when she enters. Completely. Set it aside. She is not accustomed to men who stop what they are doing when she enters a room. She has been the unremarkable Voss daughter her entire life. The one who did not have Helena's looks or their brother's easy charm. She sits. A servant pours her coffee without being asked, already knowing how she takes it. This means Adrian asked how she takes it. Again. They eat. It is not uncomfortable exactly. It is more like two careful people at the beginning of something that neither is quite sure about. He mentions that he has business in the East Wing this morning, but she is welcome to explore the grounds. The head groundskeeper, a man named Peter, will answer any questions. She says she would like to see the library. He says the library is the third door on the left past the main staircase, and he will leave a note for the librarian, Mrs. Holst. She asks, "You have a librarian?" He says, "We have a librarian." She looks at her coffee. He says, "This is yours as much as mine, Emilia. I mean that literally and otherwise." She says she understands. She is not sure she does yet. The library is enormous. 3 floors. Natural light from skylights. The smell of old paper and wood polish and something that might be cedar. Amorous. Holst is 70 years old, round-faced, and approaches Emilia the way someone might approach an interesting artifact, with academic pleasure and careful hands. She tells Emilia that His Grace said she might enjoy the East collection, the natural history section, and also that she should feel free to move things around if she doesn't like how they're arranged. Emilia says he said that. Mrs. Holst says he did. She pauses. He said you might have opinions. Emilia says he was not wrong. Mrs. Holst looks delighted. Emilia spends 4 hours in the library. She reorganizes approximately 1 shelf. She reads parts of 3 different books. She stands at the second-floor railing and looks down at the world of it and thinks, oh, this might be something. She finds him in the gardens without meaning to. He is crouched beside something in the ground. A plant? A stone? She cannot tell from the path. And he is so absorbed that he does not hear her approach. She has seen powerful men in repose before. They usually look more powerful. Adrian looks simply like a man looking at a plant, and there is something in that she cannot entirely explain. She steps on a twig. He looks up. He does not startle exactly. He simply shifts from where he was to where he is, which is standing, facing her, with dirt on one knee that he doesn't appear to notice. He shows her what he was looking at. An early winter crocus, pale purple, pushing up through the frost-hardened earth a full month too soon. She says it is confusing. He says it might just be early. They walk back to the house through the garden. Neither of them plans it. It simply happens. She finds him in the study after dinner going over estate accounts. She has come looking for a pen and ended up here instead. He offers her the chair across from his desk. She sits. He goes back to his accounts. She has brought the Border Territories book from her room and she reads it in the firelight while he works. An hour passes. It is possibly the most companionable hour she has spent in the last 5 years. She does not examine this too closely. He asks, without looking up from his ledger, how she found the library. She says, magnificent. Then she says, I reorganized a shelf. He says, only one? She says she was being polite. He says, please don't on my account. Mrs. Holst has been waiting for someone to argue with her about the philosophy section for 15 years. Emilia says, what is wrong with the philosophy section? Adrian says, everything. She looks at him. He is still looking at the ledger, but the corner of his mouth has done something. She goes back to her book. The fire settles. Outside the windows, the first light snow of the season begins to fall on Ashvale. They have established rhythms. She has not been keeping track of this, but she has. He is in the study by 6. She is in the library by 8. They breakfast together at 7:30, and it is the most genuinely comfortable meal of her day, which she also has not been examining. This morning, she arrives to find him already arguing with Fenwick about something to do with the North Pasture agreements. It is a good argument, well evidenced on both sides, comfortable in the way that shows it has happened before. When she sits down, they include her. Not pointedly. Not with the careful performative courtesy she has experienced from men who want her to feel welcome. Simply, they include her the way you include someone who is already there. She has an opinion about the North Pasture agreements. She gives it. Fenwick looks surprised for a moment, then not surprised at all. Adrian says, "I had not thought of it that way." She says, "The tenant clause." He says, "Yes." He is nodding slowly. "Yes, exactly." Fenwick says nothing. He is drinking his coffee with the expression of a man watching something he predicted come true. She rides out to the village because she wants to know what is there. She does not ask permission. She does not tell anyone where she is going. She simply goes. When she returns 2 hours later, Adrian is in the courtyard with 2 horses saddled, in riding clothes. She looks at him. He says, "I was about to come and find you. Not to bring you back. Just to find you." She believes him. The distinction matters, and she believes him. She describes what she found in the village. He listens. She mentions the weaver near the market square who has been waiting 8 months for her lease renewal. He says, "Tell Fenwick. It should have been done." She says she will. He says, "The next time you ride out, I would like to come if you will have me. I want to hear what you hear." She considers this. She says, "Tomorrow morning." He says, "I will be ready." They ride together. She sets the pace. He matches it without comment. She learns things about him on horseback that she could not have learned in a drawing room. He is patient in traffic. He remembers names: the smith, the miller's son, an old woman who sells dried herbs near the south corner. They know him, and they are not performing. Genuinely comfortable. He asks for her observations on what she sees. He listens to them differently than most people do, not waiting for her to finish so he can speak, but actually adjusting what he thinks based on what she says. This is deeply unusual. She does not know what to do with it. She decides to simply continue riding. They return to Ashvale as the noon bells ring in the village. He says, "You see things I don't." She says, "You see things I don't either." A beat. Then he says, "Good." She has started working at the library's second-floor reading table in the afternoons. He has started appearing there around 3 o'clock, which is, she has noticed, when his correspondence slows. He never sits at her table. He takes the 1-2 rows over. They work in separate silences that are somehow the same silence. She knows where he is in the room at all times. She is not thinking about this. One afternoon she reads a passage in her book that stops her cold. A thing about alliances and trust. She reads it twice. She looks up. He is already watching her. Not intrusively. Simply, he had looked up. She holds the book out across the distance between their tables. He crosses to her, reads the passage she is pointing at. He sits down across from her and they argue about it for 45 minutes, and it is one of the best conversations she has had in years. Vera has sent a letter. Vera always says exactly what she thinks. The letter says, "You sound different. Tell me everything. Also, are you happy?" Amelia sits at her writing desk for a long time before answering the letter. She writes, "I am something. I am not sure happy is the right word yet, but I am not unhappy. I am in one of the most extraordinary libraries I have ever seen. There is a crocus in the garden that bloomed too early and it has not died." She reads the letter back. She adds, he listens. She seals the letter before she can add anything else. She finds his study empty one evening when he said he would be there. She almost leaves. She does not know why she stays. She looks at the room properly for the first time. It is organized in the way of a person who thinks in structures. Everything has a place, but the places have been chosen by him, not inherited. There is one thing on his desk that is out of place. A miniature portrait. Small, silver-framed. A young woman she does not recognize, with fair hair and a certain quality of smiling. She is looking at it when he returns. He stops in the doorway. The silence changes. She says, "I am sorry." She means it. He crosses to the desk, picks up the portrait, and holds it for a moment. He sets it back down. He says her name was Charlotte. She was his betrothed 8 years ago. She died 2 months before the wedding. A fever that moved fast. He says it simply, the way you say things you have said many times inside yourself. Amelia understands something about him that she has not been able to name until now. The careful quality of him. The watching. The particular patience. He has been moving through the world with the weight of something he does not put down. She says, "I am sorry." He says, "I have been. For a long time." He pauses. "I am less so lately." He is not looking at the portrait. He is looking at her. She does not know what to do with that. She says, "I will see you at dinner." He says, "Yes." She goes. She stands in the hallway outside his study for a moment with her hand against the wall and simply breathes. Dinner is quieter than usual. Not uncomfortable. Something has shifted between them the way shifts happen. Not with noise but with a slow settling. She tells him about her family. Not the public version, the real one. Her father's debts. Her brother's ill-fated investment. The way the Voss name went from something to almost nothing in the span of 3 years. She says, "I agreed to marry Marvith because it was practical and I did not see another way." He says, "I know." She says, "You knew all of it before today." He says, "Yes." She asks, "Why? Why agree to this?" He is quiet for a moment. Then he says, "I needed to marry someone. My advisors have said so for years. I kept finding reasons to wait. But when Fenwick brought me your name," he stopped. He tries again. "I read your correspondence about the North pasture when our fathers were in negotiation. You had noticed the tenant clause before anyone else. I thought, this is someone who pays attention." She says, "That was your reason." He says, "It was a beginning." She looks at him across the table. She says, "I said your name at the altar." He says, "You did." She says, "I do not know why." He says, "Neither do I." A pause. Then he says carefully, quietly, "But I have been thinking about it since." She looks at her wine. She says, "So have I." She is walking the portrait gallery alone when she stops at a painting she hasn't noticed before. It is a young man, 20 perhaps, dark-eyed, standing in the Ashvale Gardens with a book tucked under his arm and an expression caught somewhere between seriousness and something else. It is him. Obviously, it is him. She stands there for a while looking at the younger version of the man she has somehow married. He appears behind her. She hears him before she sees him. He stands beside her and they both look at the painting. She says, "You looked very serious." He says, "I was trying to look distinguished. It did not work." She says, "What were you thinking about?" He says after a moment, "Charlotte." She had said something that morning that I was still turning over. I used to keep entire conversations in my head for days. Amelia says, "You still do that?" He says, "Yes." She says, "I know. I can tell when you are doing it." He looks at her, surprised and not surprised. He says, "What do I look like when I am doing it?" She says, "Like this." She demonstrates. A slight stillness, a quality of inwardness. Eyes that see the room but are not in it. He laughs. It is the first time she has heard him laugh without reservation. Not the quiet acknowledgement of something funny, but actually laugh. It does something to the room. She is smiling. She is surprised to find this. They must return to the capital for a social obligation, a gathering at the Earl of Pemberton's, which they cannot avoid without significant political cost. In the capital, they are Duke and Duchess Ashville. People watch them. People have opinions about them. People have been talking about the altar incident for 6 weeks and have constructed several competing narratives. Amelia knows how to handle the capital. She is, in the end, a Voss, and whatever their name lost in money it kept in backbone. She wears midnight blue. She wears her grandmother's earrings. She walks into the Earl of Pemberton's reception with her hand on Adrian's arm and her chin at an angle that has ended conversations before they began. Beside her, she feels him shift. A small adjustment in posture, the way you shift when someone beside you does something you were not expecting and it recalibrates the space. They move through the room together. They separate occasionally as expected. But they find each other again. Not by plan, just by some gravity she cannot name. She steps away to breathe. He follows approximately 8 minutes later. They stand at opposite ends of the Pemberton Library in the mutual understanding that they have both escaped the same room. She says, Lady Hargrove has told 11 people the altar story. He says, I know. Fenwick has been cataloging. She says, what is the current most popular version? He says, the one where you knew all along who I was. She says, I did not. He says, I know. But it is the most romantic version, so it will win. She looks at him. She says, do you mind? The stories. People deciding who we are. He thinks about this. He says, I minded for a long time after Charlotte. The stories people told about that. About grief and appropriate duration and what it meant about my suitability. He pauses. I find I mind this less. She says, because the story is better. He says, because I am better lately. The Pemberton Library is very quiet. She says, we should go back. He says, yes. Neither of them moves for another moment. Then they go back. They are staying in the Ashvale townhouse, which is in the capital's northern quarter and is much smaller than Ashvale Estate. They have dined separately at the reception. They return by separate carriages, though this was not planned. She is in the townhouse sitting room when he arrives home. She is reading. He has noticed, across weeks, that she reads when something is turning in her mind. He sits in the chair across from her, not asking anything, just a present. She looks up from her book. She says, what is it like, trusting someone again? He takes the question seriously. He always takes her questions seriously. He says, like standing on ice over deep water. You know it is not solid. You keep standing there anyway because the other side is worth reaching. She says, and are you standing there? He says, I have been since the altar. She puts her book down. She says, I am going to be difficult sometimes. He says, I know. She says, I will argue with you and I will be right most of the time. He says, I have noticed the ratio. She says, I am not. She stops. She says, I am not easy. He says, Amelia. He pauses. I did not want it to be easy. The fire in the townhouse sitting room burns low. She says nothing for a while. Then she says, all right. He says, all right. They walk. No carriage. No Fenwick. No attendants. Just the two of them in the capital morning, which is cold and bright and full of the smell of bakers' shops opening. She buys a small paper of roasted chestnuts from a vendor and gives him half without asking. He looks at the chestnuts. He looks at her. He looks like a man who has been handed something he did not know he was waiting for. She is not looking at him. She is eating chestnuts. He eats his chestnuts. They walk for an hour through the capital and talk about nothing in particular, which means they talk about everything. A letter arrives from Amelia's father. She reads it in the library. She reads it 3 times. Her father has, it turns out, made several representations to various parties about the terms of the marriage that are not entirely accurate. He has implied that the Ashvale funds are available to House Voss in ways that were never agreed. He has done this in writing to at least 2 creditors. She goes to Adrian's study. She hands him the letter. She does not make excuses. She stands there while he reads it. He sets the letter down. She says, I did not know. I want you to understand that I did not know. He says, I know you did not know. She says, I will write to him. I will correct it. He says, we will write to him. The word lands in the room. She says, Adrian. He says, we are married, Amelia. His problems are mine to help with. That is not charity. That is, he stops. That is what I want it to mean. She stands in his study looking at him. She says, it might be complicated. He says, I have noticed that complicated things often are. She almost laughs. She does not quite. She says, thank you. He says, sit down. Let's work on this together. They work on it together. 3 mornings, 3 evenings, letters written and discarded and written again. Fenwick is brought in. A solicitor is summoned. Her father sends a reply that is not exactly an apology, but it is a retreat. They sit across from each other in the study with papers spread between them, and they think in the same direction for the first time. It is, she has no better word for it, intimate. Not the kind of intimate she expected. Something more fundamental. Being trusted with someone's working mind. On the third evening, when the last letter has been sealed, she looks across the desk at him. He looks tired and entirely present. She says, "You are a decent man." He says, "I am trying to be." She says, "You are succeeding." He says nothing. He looks at his hands for a moment. Then he looks at her. Then he says, "You are more than I expected. I mean that as the highest possible compliment." She says, "I know. The early crocus is still there. Against all botanical probability, it has not died." They stand beside it in the early evening cold. She says, "It should not still be here." He says, "No." She says, "Why is it still here?" He says, "I have been talking to it." She turns to look at him. He says, without any apparent embarrassment, "I talk to the difficult ones. It seems to help." She says, "You talk to a flower." He says, "I am not entirely immune to foolish behavior." She laughs. Comes out before she can redirect it. A real one, the kind that surprises you when it arrives. He looks at her laughing. His face does something that she does not look at directly, because she is not ready for what she sees there. She is moving books. Properly now, with a system. Mrs. Holst is helping and has been, clearly, waiting for this her entire career. Adrian comes to the library at his usual 3 o'clock. He stops in the door and looks at the reorganization in progress. He says nothing. He gets his book and sits at his usual table. 20 minutes later he says, "Where did you put Alderton's principles?" She says, "Under moral philosophy, where it belongs." He says, "It was under economic theory." She says, "It was wrong." A pause. He says, "I may need Alderton's principles." She gets up, finds it in 8 seconds and puts it on his table. He says, "Thank you." She goes back to her books. Mrs. Holst, on the far side of the room, is smiling in a way she does not attempt to conceal. She is coming out of her chambers. He is coming down the hallway from the opposite direction. They stop at the same point. She says, "I was looking for you." He says, "I was coming to find you." A beat. She says, "There is something I have been thinking about." He says, "So have I." Another beat. She says, Shall we?" He says very quietly, "Amelia." She says, "Yes." He says, "I am in love with you." The hallway of Ashvale Estate. Candlelight on old stone. Outside, the winter is doing what winter does, which is arrive without apology. She looks at him. She looks at him for a long time. She says, "I said your name at the altar and I did not know why." He says, "Yes." She says, "I think I know why now." He says nothing. He waits. He is always very good at waiting. She says, "I did not want Marvith. I had already built something in my mind that I could not name. And then I was standing at the altar and I opened my mouth and I named it." He says, "Adrian." She says, "Adrian." They stand in the hallway. She says, "I love you." She says it the way she says things she has decided. Simply, completely, without hedging. He crosses the 3 steps between them. He takes her hand. He holds it like something he intends to keep. They end up in the study because this is where they always end up. By the fire. Books nearby. She is sitting in the chair she has made her own over these weeks. He is in his. Their hands are still together across the space between the chairs. She says, "It was the most embarrassing moment of my life." He says, "The altar." She says, "I said a name I had no reason to know and 300 people heard it." He says, "And then you had to stay and finish the ceremony." She says, "And then I had to stay and finish the ceremony." He says, "You were very composed." She says, "I have a gift for appearing composed while being absolutely not composed." He says, "I know. I could tell." She says, "How could you tell?" He says, "You walked faster coming down the nave than going up. You always walk faster when you are processing something." She realizes he has been watching her walk for weeks. She realizes she knows exactly how he stands when he is tired versus when he is thinking. They have been cataloging each other this whole time. She says, Vera is going to be insufferable. He says, Fenwick already is. She says, good. They deserve each other. He laughs. She laughs. The fire burns. The first real frost of the season arrives overnight and covers everything in white. She wakes to it and goes directly to the garden. He is already there, standing beside the crocus, which is impossibly stubbornly still standing. She comes to stand beside him. He says, I told him winter was coming. She says, clearly it did not listen. He says, it never does. The garden in winter. Frost on every branch. The sun just arrived over the Ashvale walls. The crocus, pale purple, refusing the season. She leans into him slightly. His arm comes around her, naturally, like something arranged long before today. She says, what did you say to it? When you were talking to it? He says, I told him there was a reason to stay. She looks at the crocus. She says, and was there? He looks at her. He says, yes. Vera has come to visit. She arrives at breakfast having traveled overnight because she could not wait. She takes one look at Amelia and one look at Adrian and says nothing at all, which is very unlike Vera. Then she says, so, he is decent, then. Amelia says, considerably more than decent. Adrian says, good morning, Countess. Vera says, I have opinions about what happened at the altar. I have been saving them. Adrian says, I look forward to hearing them. Vera looks at him. She looks at Amelia. She sits down and accepts coffee. She says, she said your name. He says, she did. Vera says, she had never heard it before. He says, no. Vera says, how do you explain that? A pause. He says, I do not try to. Vera considers this. She nods very slowly, the way people nod when something confirms a thing they already believed. Amelia drinks her coffee and says nothing. She realizes, completely happy. Vera has pulled Amelia away for a proper talk, the kind only sisters have, which covers everything that letters cannot. Vera says, tell me everything. Amelia tells her. The library, the study, the border territories book, the North Pasture argument, the village rides, Charlotte, the flower urn at the reception, the chestnuts, the crocus, the hallway. Vera listens to all of it. When Amelia is done, Vera says, you said his name. Amelia says, I know. Vera says, you said it before you knew why. Amelia says, yes. Vera says, there are not many things we know before we know why. Amelia says, no, there aren't. She finds him in the portrait gallery again. He is standing in front of a different painting this time, not himself. A painting of Ashvale in summer, from some decades back. She stands beside him and looks at the painting. The painted Ashvale is the same and different. The gardens are fuller. The west wing has a different roof. She says, I would like to see it in summer. He says, you will. She says, I want to fix the west wing roof. He says, it does need it. She says, and the tenant agreements. He says, yes. She says, and I want more shelves in the library. He says, Mrs. Holst has been waiting years. The portrait gallery in winter evening light. All the Adrians before him are looking down from the walls, and her beside the present one making plans for things that will happen in the future. She says, Adrian. He says, yes. She says, I am glad I said your name. He says, so am I. He pauses. I have thought about it every day since. What it would have been like if you had said the right name. She says, Marvith. He says, if you had said Marvith, and meant it. She says, I would not have meant it. I have never meant anything less in my life. He says, good. She says, are you going to keep saying good like that? He says, for the foreseeable future, yes. She takes his hand. He holds it. They look at the painting. 6 weeks have passed. The estate is properly in winter. They have established themselves. The rhythms have deepened. The study, the library, the breakfast table, the garden rounds, the evening fire. Fenwick and Mrs. Holst and the head groundskeeper Peter have rearranged themselves around this new shape of things. Amelia has reorganized the entire East collection in the library and is working her way toward the north. She has started corresponding with the village weavers about fair lease practices. She has argued with Adrian 6 times about various things and been right 4 of those times, which is a ratio she considers reasonable. She notes privately, happy. Not the cautious, practical contentment she had aimed for with Marvith. Something different, specific. Hi, hers. She thinks about the altar sometimes. The moment her mouth opened and the wrong right name came out. She has stopped calling it a mistake. She is not sure what to call it. Something in her had known before her mind did. He is at his desk. She is in her chair. The fire is good. She looks up from her book. She says, Adrian. He looks up. She says, I am going to read something to you. Tell me what you think. She reads him a passage from the Border Territories book, a theory about the relationship between geography and alliance-making. He listens with his full attention. Then he says, I think the author has not spent enough time actually at the border. She says, I have been thinking the same. He says, we could go. In the spring. She says, to the border. He says, it is worth seeing. She says, yes. She puts the book in her lap. She looks at the fire and then at him. And she thinks, this is it. This is the thing I could not have designed or predicted or planned. The right name at the wrong moment, which turned out to be the right moment after all. The crocus is gone. She stands at its spot in the frozen garden. He comes out and stands beside her. She says, it's gone. He says, yes. Last night. She says, you checked on it. He says, I always check on the difficult ones. She is quiet for a moment. She says, it stayed longer than it should have. He says, it did what it needed to. Then it let the season have it. She looks at the empty spot on the earth. She says, it will come back in spring. He says, crocuses always do. The empty garden, the winter sky, the two of them standing at a patch of frozen earth where a small thing grew too early and stayed longer than it should have. She takes his arm. They go inside. The season turns. There is a morning when she comes down to the garden and the east beds are beginning to green, and the smell of the earth is different, and she knows, the way you know things in your whole body, that winter is over. She is standing at the edge of the garden when he comes to find her. He says nothing. He comes to stand beside her. They look at the garden while waking up. She says, there. He says, where? She points. At the edge of the walk, in the same place it was before. A pale purple crocus. New growth. Returned. He says, I told him spring was coming. She says, you are still talking to flowers. He says, it works. She leans into him. His arm comes around her. She says, what did you say this time? He says, that there was someone here who wanted to see it. She says, it listened. He says, it always does, eventually. The Ashvale garden in spring. Everything is beginning. The 3 of them, Amelia, Adrian, Fenwick, who has materialized as usual. Fenwick has a letter. He passes it to Adrian. Adrian reads it. He looks at Amelia. He says, the North Pasture Agreement has been finalized, and the Weaver's lease is resolved. Amelia says, all of them. He says, all 23. She says, good. Fenwick says it was her methodology, you know. I want that noted. Amelia says, I am noting it. Adrian says, I noted it months ago. Fenwick looks from one to the other. He says, you are both extremely pleased with yourselves. Amelia says, yes. Adrian says, yes. Fenwick drinks his coffee. They return to the cathedral in spring. Not for the ceremony. Simply to be there. It is empty. The candles are extinguished. The flower arrangements are gone. It is just the cathedral. Stone and light and the smell of old wood. They walk down the nave together. She stops where the altar is. She looks at the spot where she stood. He stands beside her. She says, I was so terrified. He says, I could tell. She says, you smiled. He says, I had been thinking on the walk to the altar that this was going to be the loneliest thing I had ever done. Marrying a stranger for practical reasons and making the best of it. And then you looked up at me and said, he pauses. My name. As if you already knew. She says, I did not know. He says, but it felt that way. She stands at the altar where she made a mistake that turned out not to be a mistake. The cathedral light falls the same way it did 6 months ago. The stone floor is the same stone floor. She reaches for his hand. He takes it. She says, if I had not said it. He says, don't. She says, I know. But sometimes I think about it. He says, so do I. And then I stop because you did. She squeezes his hand. They stand at the altar that is no longer an altar, just a place in a cathedral, and they are exactly where they are. In the carriage. Together this time. She has fallen asleep against his shoulder somewhere in the second hour. He has not moved. She wakes as they turn through the Ashvale gates. She knows where she is before she opens her eyes. She knows the sounds of the gates, the particular rhythm of the Ashvale road. She knows the shoulder she is leaning on. She says, without moving, are we home? He says, yes. She says, good. She does not move for another moment. Neither does he. The carriage rolls through the gates. Ashvale in spring, in the evening, with the first stars just appearing. Home. The wheel has turned. Frost again. She is in the garden before he is, this time. She stands at the crocus bed and waits. He finds her there. He says, it has gone down for the winter. She says, it will come back. He says, I know. She says, I am going to start talking about it. He says, it responds well to honesty. She says, I have heard about difficult things. He says, most difficult things are just waiting for the right conditions. She turns to look at him. He is looking at her with that expression, the one she did not know how to read at the altar and now reads completely, the one that is entirely about her. She says, Adrian. He says, yes. She says, I am going to say your name every time I mean it. He says, good. She says, and possibly sometimes I do not. He says, I will take them all. The garden, the frost, the bare earth where a crocus waits for spring. She takes his hand. He holds it. They stand there together in the first frost of the new season, which is also the beginning of something that has already long since begun. If the story touched you, leave a like and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It means everything to know how far these stories travel. Subscribe to join us for the next tale. Until then, may every dark road lead you somewhere worth arriving.